Hi everyone, it's Angela from Cake Angel, and in this week's Bake Along I'm going to show you how to make a dairy-free Bakewell Tart. So let's get going. The first thing we're going to do is make our pastry base for the tart cases, and I'm going to start with 200 grams of all-purpose flour. I'm going to add a pinch of salt to that, and then I'm going to go ahead and add my butter to this. Now this is a plant-based butter. I'm using 100 grams of unsalted butter and giving it a little bit of a stir to start with. And then I'm actually going to get my hands in there and start to rub the butter in. Now this is going to form a sandy texture, almost like breadcrumbs. And then we're going to go ahead and add the remaining ingredients. So that's 25 grams of icing sugar, which I'm just going to quickly mix in with my hands. You can see I've got my egg beaten in the bowl on the side. And once the icing sugar is combined, I'm going to add the egg to the mix. And then I'm just going to go ahead and start mixing that together with my hands. Now I find this a lot easier to do with my hands rather than using a mixer, so I can get a really good feel of the texture for the pastry. And I'm going to keep kneading it in the bowl until it forms a really nice ball of pastry for us. And once it's nicely combined, I'm just going to pop it on my counter, use a little bit of that flour that spilled over earlier, and start to knead it together. The next thing we're going to need to do is roll that out, so I'm just going to grab my tart cases for this. Now this recipe will actually make a large tart, but I'm going to turn this into 4 individual tarts instead. I think it's a really nice size to use, and these have got the removable bottoms on them. So you can see now I'm going ahead and I'm rolling out my pastry. And then I'm using the bottom of one of the tart cases to give me a rough guide of how much pastry I'll need. So then I'm just going to place it in my case and I'm going to roughly press it down. You can see that I'm actually pushing it against the sides of the case as well. I'm going to do the same with the next one. So I'm just going to re-knead that pastry together and roll it out again. And you will need to do this for each case that you're using. So don't worry, if you find that your pastry starts to crumble a little bit, don't worry about it. It will actually come back together really nicely. So let's get that second one done. Again, you can see I'm kind of pushing the pastry up against the sides of the case, using my fingers to press everything into place as well. I don't need to use anything else to stick it, it will stick on its own. So I'm going to roll up and then I'm going to re-roll for the third case. Now you can see I've just added a little bit of flour, that's just to stop it sticking from my counter. And this will be for the third case. And you can see as well that I'm also using a spatula sometimes just to help trim off the top of those cases. Now you don't need to worry if your pastry looks as if it's breaking at this point. When it bakes, it will actually all melt together really nicely. So don't worry if you have some cracks in there. Now let's see if we can get the fourth one out there. I don't quite have enough dough, so I'm going to actually have to push it up the sides a little bit. This one will be a little bit thinner. It'll still taste great though, so I'm not too worried about it. Let's cut off those end pieces. And there's our 4 cases done. So now I'm going to pop these in the fridge to cool while I go ahead and make the filling. Now the reason we do that is it will actually relax the pastry and stop it shrinking as well. So let's clean up our counters and get ready to make the filling. So for the filling, it's traditionally called a frangipane. We're going to be using almond flour for this, which makes it a gluten-free filling. And if you wanted to change this to a gluten-free tart, then you would just need to use a gluten-free flour for the pastry, and then you have a gluten mix for it. So to start with, I've got my sugar and butter. So I'm using 100 grams of plant-based butter, 100 grams of sugar, and I'm just beating those together with my hand mixer. You want to make sure everything is nice and combined. I have 3 eggs here, so I'm just going to give them a quick beat in the bowl. And all of my ingredients are at room temperature for this as well. So I'm going to add a little bit at a time and then mix it each time as well so that it combines nicely. We don't want it to get too wet by adding it all in one go, so just take your time and add a little bit at a time. Make sure you give it a good beat in between each addition. Next we're going to add our almond flour or almond meal. It's called different things in different places, but it's essentially ground almonds. I'm adding 150 grams of that and also a few drops of almond essence as well. And then you want to give it a good stir with a spatula to combine. You can see that it's a fairly loose mixture, which is great because that's going to flow really nicely when we add it to our tart cases. So now I've got my cases back out from the fridge. The first thing we're going to do is actually line them with a raspberry jam. And if you're not a fan of raspberry, you could use a different flavour. Raspberry is the traditional jam that we would use for Bakewell tarts though, so that's what we're using here. You just want to make sure that you add a nice even layer across the bottom of each of the tarts. And I'm using a teaspoon here just to help me spread it out to make sure it gets all the way to the sides. Okay, that's perfect. That's our 4 cases lined. And finally, we're going to add our frangipane mixture to them. So again, I'm using my spatula for this because it's a silicone spatula. It will actually spread really nicely and it won't stick to it. So it allows me to spread it out evenly across the tart cases as well. Now, they will actually flatten off as they bake as well. So don't worry if you have a little bit of a rough finish to that. And you essentially just want to keep going until you've used most of the mixture. If you can fit all of it in, then great, but don't worry if you have some extra. You can actually use that for other tarts. As I said at the beginning, this recipe will actually make a much larger tart, so when you make individual ones, you quite often have extra filling left. And to store that, to keep it for another day, you can actually freeze it, or you can just keep it in the fridge for a week. Okay, so that's our tarts filled. The final thing we're going to do is just add some almonds on top, just for decoration. Now it's up to you whether you want to do this or not, depending on if you like to have all those extra almonds in there. It is a very strong flavoured almond tart, obviously, because it has 3 different types of almonds in there with the almond flour, the almond essence, and also the almonds on top. So I'm just going to add them to 2 of mine. And these are ready to bake. So these are going in my preheated oven. It's at 170 degrees centigrade, 340 degrees Fahrenheit, and you want to bake them until they look golden, which is about 25 minutes. But of course, knowing your own oven, that may take a little bit longer or it may bake slightly quicker. And there we go, there's our Bakewell tarts baked. You can see they've risen slightly. They are a nice even shape. Nice and golden as well, and you can see those almonds have stayed on top, giving a really nice design. And as these are hot, I would suggest that we leave them cool before we do anything else with them, but I'm just going to pick one up so you can see it a little closer. Look how great that looks, really, really nice golden colour. And I'm just touching the top, so you shouldn't really have any springiness in these. They are quite a firm fill-in when they're baked. So the next thing we're going to do is actually let them cool completely before we serve them. And I've taken one out of the tin so I can actually cut it and show you what they look like inside. So there you go, you can see we've got that really nice layer of jam in the bottom and the nice pale frangipane on top of that with our golden crust as well. Perfect Bakewell tart. I really hope you've enjoyed this bake along. Don't forget to leave me a comment below if you've ever tried these. These are a really popular dessert in the UK. Make sure you're subscribing to my channel as well so you can get updates when we post our next video. Thanks for watching.